Welcome back to Via Hafta TV. My name is Avrum Rosenzweig, and I am here today with Rabbi Howard Morrison of Beth Emma's Synagogue in Toronto. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Now, over the last number of weeks, we've actually had the opportunity to speak to a number of different rabbis on Via Hafta TV, and I don't think it's by happenstance. That our producers invite rabbis to speak about tikkun olam, because it seems to me, being a rabbi's son, that you are at the very core of tikkun olam in a community, in our community. That's your job. Your job is to repair the world through your flock. Would that be correct?
Very much so. I see that every time I interact with a person, young or old, with a group of people, with the congregation, with the community at large, that hopefully I'm doing my little piece of bringing some repair to some little corner of the world in which we live. So absolutely, tikkun olam, repairing the breaches in our world, is a major mandate of what any rabbi does.
You know, Howard, I was thinking the other day, you were born in the United States in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, Brookline. You went to the Rabbinical School of Jewish Theology, a theological seminary of America. And you became a rabbi. In 2000, you came to Toronto. You have quite the resume. And I was considering the other day, based on my own history, again, as a rabbi's son, rabbis are monsters. And I mean that in a good way, by the way. You're good monsters. I've been watching some of my colleagues who are rabbis or spiritual leaders, mutual friends, Ellie Rubenstein here in Toronto. And I watch you guys and the women I know who are rabbis tend, as I said, to their flocks. And every Shabbat you are on. High holidays, you have to be present for many, many families. How many families do you have in your shul?
We have close to 1,400 affiliated families with our congregation.
Your task is really, it's a skyscraper of a task. You have to know names. If someone's sick, God forbid, you have to go visit. If you don't, you're in real trouble. I mean, this is a big job. Would you agree?
I agree. I don't always frame it in that way because I really thrive on what I do.
Yes.
I find tremendous spiritual fulfillment in what I do. I probably don't recognize that I'm on because I am, as you say, on probably most of the time.
Yes.
And I really don't distinguish so much between Howard Morrison and Rabbi Howard Morrison, one and the same. So I just try to be myself in whatever situation I find myself in.
What do most of your congregants call you?
Anything they want. The children,
Yes.
by my request, call me Rabbi Howie.
Okay.
Because I want children to have their own endearing relationship with me. And the members of the congregation, some call me Rabbi Morrison, some call me in a private situation by my first name, which is fine. I allow that to be the case.
Yes.
I'm not held up about titles. I think the concept of rabbi is a respectful concept, but I don't always demand that the title be used, especially in a more social situation.
Rabbi means?
Teacher.
Means teacher.
Someone who's proficient in Jewish text, Jewish laws, Jewish values.
So is it correct to say you have 1,400 plus students?
They're all students in one way or another. Some of those students I see every day. Most I see a few times a year. Many I see every week or a couple of times a month. And that's just in terms of synagogue attendance. Of course, I see many through life cycle experiences or through educational programs.
Child born, bris milah, baby naming, bar and bat mitzvah, and God willing, down the road, their marriage, right?
Right, and then of course the sad end of the spectrum at the time of funerals
Yeah.
and unveilings. And that's a time when emotions are raw, either because they are so joyous or because they're so distraught. And that's when a rabbi really has to be empathetic and sensitive, not only to the mind, but to the heart and the soul.
What do you do on a really lousy day? Someone died in your community and you're just feeling not too good, but you got to be there. How do you do it?
Yeah, well, I give myself some private time before I have to enter the public arena, and I'm able to kind of psych myself up in a genuine, appropriate way in that private time through my own reflection, through my own meditation, my own quiet and solitude. There's a concept in Judaism called hitbodedut, taking a moment or a period of time to just be silent and still. And I'll use my own personal spiritual solitude to prepare me for the happy or for that extremely sad situation.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to the monster concept, the good monster concept. I remember growing up, and granted, my father does come from a different generation than you and I. We're the same age. But he was the rabbi who wore the black suit all the time, and I think he was seen as Rabbi Rosenzweig by the vast majority of people whom he knew. Different than yourself. But I know, for instance, if my father were to go on holiday with my mother, which was very rare, the worst thing that could happen would be to see a congregant, swimming next to them in the ocean. Because then, as you said before, he didn't feel as though he could be himself. Does that resonate with you at all?
A little bit, but not as much. I'm very comfortable being seen outside the official surroundings and letting people know that I'm a real person.
Yeah.
I take a sense of pride that I'm able to reveal the true Howard Morrison to my congregants. I've often in sermons or informal venues, displayed my own frailties, my own challenges, my
You're not
own
afraid
concerns.
to do that?
I take it to a point, obviously,
Yes.
but I never feel awkward seeing somebody in a supermarket or at a sporting event or at a vacation site. Just the opposite, I relish it.
Yeah, I think it's the new rabbi that we're speaking of. It's definitely a different generation. We're going to go to a break, but when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Rabbi Howard Morrison, who's a rabbi here in Toronto at Beth Emeth Synagogue. We want to get into the whole realm of Canadian Jews versus American Jews, because as I said, you were born in the States, you've been here since the year 2000, as well as discussing your stint with the U.S. Air Force as a reserve chaplain. So stay with us. You're watching via Hafta TV. Welcome back to Via Hafta TV. We are here with Rabbi Howard Morrison, a rabbi in Toronto. I think it's safe to say that some people know their rabbi, and some people think that they know their rabbi. Would you agree with that statement or disagree?
No, yes, I would agree. Obviously, the ones who have more ongoing interaction with me have a sense of identification, with their rabbi, perhaps more so. But I would say even the ones who I see less often, who belong to the synagogue.
Yes.
There is a feeling, my synagogue, my rabbi.
Yes.
So even if they don't know Howard Morrison well, but Rabbi Howard Morrison is my rabbi.
Right.
So there is a sense of affection and relationship, even with the ones I don't see all that often.
How much do you allow yourself to empathize with your congregants? As an example, not to be too maudlin, you're at a cemetery on a rainy day, and someone whom you have known for, let's say, 10 years, you've been here since 2000, has passed away. You're burying them. It's a lot to bear. I mean, as I said before, you guys have a lot on your shoulders. Do you allow yourself to go far with this empathy, or do you know where to stop?
I think I know where to stop. If I lose emotion altogether, I'm not genuine.
Right.
I'm not real.
Right.
But if I become akin to the mourner, him or herself, that's also not genuine, because I'm not the mourner. And my emotions would be too extreme if I tried to behave like the mourner.
Right, like the social worker.
So I show my empathy and my sympathy. I consider myself very caring and very expressive with emotion from me to the mourner, and allowing the mourner to express true emotion back to me. But there is a line not to cross. Otherwise, I'm not being effective as a rabbinical person. A source of inspiration, a source of healing, a source of comfort, a source of strength. So there is a genuine line. And I've been in the rabbinate for 25 years. And I just think over the years, just my natural instincts have taught me to become more instinctively empathetic and knowing where those boundaries are.
You're probably hitting your stride now, aren't you? I know I am at 51 years old.
Well,
we're the same age.
I kind of feel like I'm starting anew.
Yes.
And when I turned 50 a year and a half ago, not that I needed any comfort, I was fine.
Yeah.
Rabbi, today's 50 is yesteryear's 40. You're
Yeah.
right in the prime of your life and prime of your rabbinical work, and I actually do feel that I'm in the prime of what I'm trying to accomplish in the
They
world.
say that 50 is the youth of age.
I'll take it.
Did you have a
with
party for your 50th?
No, just the congregation was very kind to me. They kind of did a Dean Martin's roast, on the bima, on the pulpit, on a Shabbat Sabbath morning.
What do they bug you about? What's your Achilles heel?
Well, I create my own Achilles heel because I make it very clear that I was born outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And I am a big-time Boston sports fan, especially with the baseball, with the Red Sox. So when my teams are doing well, I will razz that into my sermons and or into the service itself. And when my team gets tripped up, I hear it back. So, for example, my Red Sox had a poor September this past year.
Yes.
The season kind of imploded. I'm still hearing about it. So it's a fun Achilles heel. I have a nice give and take with the congregation because of my loyalties with sports.
Very good, very good. Now, just talking about that, being born in the United States, you were born in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston, and you came here in the year 2000. You had a fascinating stint with the U.S. Air Force as a reserve chaplain. And I have this image in my mind of this open space and cement and planes about to take off and you walking with the wind blowing through your rabbinical hair, tending to or talking to, Jewish soldiers on this air base, almost like a romantic vision of a Hollywood vision. Is that even close?
There's some of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot more. I
Yeah.
will tell you the impetus for my entering the United States Air Force chaplaincy program was when I was a rabbinical student and we were encouraged to fill our summertime with meaningful work and a sense of patriotism, a sense that there are Jews who are not being served Jewishly in the military, and a desire on my part for interfaith relationship building because I knew a little bit about Christianity and other faiths, but I never really had a day-to-day interaction with the clergy of other faiths. And one of the gifts that I received in the chaplaincy was working out of an interfaith chapel, which had clergy of different faiths working active duty full-time or reserve duty part-time. And then the same sacred space in the chapel, the sanctuary, would be a synagogue Friday night or Saturday morning, converted into a church setting on Sunday. I was first and foremost a chaplain to all faiths. And then secondarily, I was a rabbi to those of the Jewish faith. And I did this for 20 years, which is the maximum one can do as a part-time reserve chaplain.
Do you have stripes?
And I love the experience. I am a ranked officer that goes with it. So I went from second lieutenant to first lieutenant to captain, and I finished up as a major when I completed my 20-year term.
So when you walk on the Air Force Base, do you take that as seriously as the soldiers would?
Absolutely.
You would. You would. And
officer
they would show
and chaplain.
Yeah. How does that spell out? How does that play out?
Some people would actually call me major. Some people would call me chaplain. Some who are more officer-oriented went with the rank. Some who are more spiritually oriented, went with the religious title. I blended in with the military folk. My uniform was the same as their uniform. As a Jewish chaplain, I would wear on my jacket or shirt a symbol of the Jewish chaplaincy, which was the Ten Commandments with a shield of David on top.
Wow.
And I would wear a very dark yarmulke head covering over my head. So those were my Jewish identification
How
symbols.
proud were you when you were doing this?
I loved it.
I'm proud listening to it,
I love, talk about tikkun olam. I was giving not only to the Jewish community, but I felt I was truly giving something back to the world community.
I want to continue our discussion on this because I think our viewers will enjoy this tremendously. How often does anyone have the opportunity to see a chaplain in the United States Army, doing their work? So when we come back from the break, we'll continue our discussion on this. Stay with us. You're watching V'Ahavta Television, taking you into the world of empathy today with Rabbi Howard Morrison. Welcome back to V'Ahavta Television with Rabbi Howard Morrison. Rabbi, we were speaking before the break that you actually just retired, if you will, from the U.S. Air Force as a reserve chaplain, performing most of your duties at the McGuire Air Force Base in southern New Jersey. There are a lot of Army and Air Force and Navy movies that we get very excited about, and there's something very exciting about you as a rabbi working with the Air Force, the American Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, and helping out soldiers and working together with other men of the women of the cloth, if you will, and sharing your stories and sharing your wares. I asked you during the break if there was a particular person that you remember, a colleague perhaps, or a story that you've been told in the Air Force that really, really stayed with you all these years.
Yeah, a few incidents come to mind. First of all, I served in the reserves from 1984 to 2006 when I retired. And there was really just a handful of rabbis, at least at that time, between active duty and reserve duty in the United States Air Force. In the chaplain school class, which I attended in 1984, there were 59 students. This was at a base in Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base.
Wow.
We had 29 Catholics, 29 Protestants, and me. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And one of the first stories that one of the teachers, who was not Jewish, told to the class was a story about the relationship of a Jewish chaplain and a Christian chaplain during a wartime situation in the Middle East, where a military person was bleeding and there was no bandage or towel nearby. And so the rabbi took the yarmulke, the head covering, off his head and used that to help clean up this military person who was bleeding. And when the Catholic chaplain saw what the rabbi did, the Catholic chaplain tore off a piece of his uniform in a round shape so that the rabbi then had a yarmulke to put back on his head. It was a wonderful, wonderful story of how spiritual representatives of different faiths truly became brothers and were really as one at the time. In my own personal experience, I would often man a deployment line, and this could happen at 3 in the morning, where I would see men and women who would be flying to an exigent situation at some part of the globe that was kept secret that I didn't even know about.
And they may not come back, right?
Yeah, you hope they would. And I was dealing more with Air Force personnel, so they were not frontline in the trenches. So their chance of coming back was obviously much better than perhaps some others. But I would be involved in some serious spiritual counseling, their concerns, leaving me ideas and materials to give back to their dependents, their wife or their children.
What was that like?
Very moving, very emotional for me. And yet I felt, again, I was giving something to the world around me. I was in a very pastoral role, a very caring role. And I would spend a lot of time with a dependent family that lived on base. The housing was on the Air Force base. So the military member, male or female, could be off in an exigent circumstance. And I would be making sure the rest of the family members were doing okay, were hanging in there.
Where did you see yourself in the world when these things were happening?
I saw myself on the playing arena, but a little bit on the sideline.
Okay.
Because in my personal circumstance, I was never deployed overseas. I was a backfill support, always within the United States.
Do you feel lesser then, or do you feel this is just my role?
This was my role, and every role has a contribution.
Because I know in Israel, and you probably know this as well, you speak to Israelis who were not fighters, who were not soldiers, and they call themselves jobnikim, many of them. In other words, the idea that if I wasn't fighting, I'm lesser than. But that wasn't your...
Right, so I would not have felt that way. I felt that I was making my contribution.
Were these guys and girls, were they frightened? Were they afraid?
Some yes, some no. Some had these situations before they were seasoned, and others were brand new in the military, and they were prepared for it intellectually. But emotional preparedness is very different than intellectual preparedness.
What would some say to you, Howard?
I didn't realize how concerned I am moving forward. Or others would say, this is what I've been trained for, and I'm ready to help. So there's no monolithic response, as varied as the human experience.
What would you say when they would say that?
I just listen to them. Listening, effective listening, empathetic listening, hearing their concerns, validating their concerns. These situations, much like my other rabbinical counseling, it's not about what I think or what I have to say. It's about what they're thinking, what they have to say, and how I can be supportive.
Was it okay to hug them?
Depending on the situation. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah. That's fascinating, just fascinating. We're talking with Rabbi Howard Morrison, a rabbi in Toronto, Canada, who has been here since the year 2000. A great lover of baseball, great lover of Boston and all things having to do with Boston. Faneuil Hall, I enjoyed Faneuil Hall very much. We're going to go to a break, and when we return, we're going to dive into a sort of a murky pool, if you will, having to do with the difference between American Jews and Canadian Jews. Viscerally, I know that there are. I guess experientially, you're certain that there are differences. Right?
I look forward to exploring that with you.
Yes, I do as well. So stay with us. You're watching via Hafta TV. We're taking you into the world of empathy with Rabbi Howard Morrison. Welcome back to Via Havta Television. Rabbi, you said that you see yourself in three different worlds. You're American, clearly. I call you apple pie, actually. You are living in Canada. Are you a Canadian?
I am a permanent resident of Canada, and I love living here.
Will you go for your citizenship?
Hopefully one day. My children are ready yesterday, and I need to learn a little bit more about the country in which I'm residing.
Yeah. Who was the first Prime Minister of Canada?
Thank you very much.
There you go. And you also see yourself as part of Israel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Have you spent a lot of time in Israel?
Yes, I've never lived there permanently. I spent a year of my rabbinical education in Jerusalem. This past summer, I spent 6 weeks studying in Israel.
At the Hartman Institute?
At the Hartman Institute and the Conservative Yeshiva, which are nearby each other geographically. It was a great summer of learning and seeing many colleagues and making new friendships along the way with new colleagues. I see myself as just blessed, being an American-born Jew, and I have a lot of family back in the States. The family that I'm raising now in Toronto and the congregation which I proudly serve every day, and my commitment to the people, the state, and the land of Israel. I am truly blessed in all of those areas.
So, I guess at first blush, if you take a look at an American Jew and a Canadian Jew, and you have some sense of sociology, you're able to see past the veneer, I would say that there are differences. I was born here in Kitchener, Ontario, which is about an hour away from Toronto. We happened to be, by the way, growing up, we were the farm team for the New York Rangers. So I'm bringing it home for you a little bit. And those were the days of Eddie Giacomin and Walt Kachuk. They were good days.
I think of Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, and Jerry Cheevers.
There you go. There you go. And I think that American Jews are much different than Canadian Jews in terms of, as an example, political affiliation.
Yeah, in my experience, and I'm more grounded in the American Jewish culture, but I am learning very fast about Canadian Jewish culture, and specifically Toronto Jewish culture, which might be different than perhaps other parts of Canada. So we don't want to be too generic about American Canadian. There are differences within each country. But I know people talk about the American Jewish scene as having gone through a melting pot, and the Canadian Jewish scene not having gone through a melting pot, but always embracing multiculturalism. So a certain Jewish distinctiveness was validated perhaps more so over the decades in Canada, where Jews, perhaps during the 1950s, 60s, were going through, let's look like everybody else.
Yes.
I certainly see that in America, the demographic pattern is that families spread out. You see very few multi-generational families in the same community. Whereas in Toronto, it's a blessing when 3 or 4 generations of a family spend Shabbat evening together on a Friday night around the table, sit together in the synagogue on the Jewish high holy days or another occasion. So there are demographic differences.
Why are Americans so transient?
I think there are...
Everybody in New York's not from New York. Everyone from LA is not from LA.
I think people find that they have opportunities to advance themselves in many different sectors of the country. So you can go to, 20 or 30 different big areas and have a solid university education. There's a solid Jewish community. You might find your partner in a different city or a different state. So there's a lot more mobility for educational and professional advancement. I really don't know Canada. I'm in Toronto, and it seems to me a lot of people who grew up in Toronto love Toronto. They see this as, if not one of the more metropolitan cities in general, and metropolitan Jewish communities to be in Canada. So they stay.
Education is a very big deal here in Toronto, Jewish education. I was just reading a quote from Ted Sokolsky, who's the director of the Jewish Federation, who said that we raise more money and allocate more funds to the schools here, the day schools and the supplementary schools, I think, than 3 or 4 federations combined in the United States.
Yeah, I think it depends on where in the United States. I think there are some cities that give a tremendous amount of money from their local UJ Federation to Jewish education. What I do find, however, is certainly in the non-Orthodox Jewish community, there is a larger number of young people in Toronto who still go to parochial Jewish day school, and there are many, many parochial Jewish day schools that are thriving, which they can affiliate with, whereas I would say a majority of non-Orthodox Jewish youngsters in the States will go to a public school and then a supplementary Jewish educational program. So there is a stronger day school affiliation here in Toronto than there is in many parts of the United States.
So some people will argue that the Canadian character or personality is different or has differences than that of the American personality or character. I would argue personally that I've always had a sense there's an American dream, and the average person works very hard to achieve it, although there certainly have been blips along the road, more so lately. And there's this real sense of entrepreneurialism and drive to be the very best. And certainly when Obama became the president of the United States, the first black president, that was encouraged and that was reinforced, the idea that if you work hard enough, you can get there. Whereas Canadians, we were kind of brought up on mediocrity. I remember as a kid, nobody ever won. You know what I mean? Okay, everybody gets the same prize, right? We were not encouraged to be the best. Now, some viewers may argue that's a brushstroke statement. Let me put that in your court. What do you think?
In my limited 12-year experience in Toronto,
Yes.
I actually find the people I've interacted with to be very proud Canadians,
Yes.
and very proud of their Canadian culture, and possibly because they know I'm American born, there is a pride about, you have the 4th of July, but we have Canada Day on July 1st,
Yeah.
and they are very much equated. So I find a lot of pride about Canadian patriotism amongst the people I have met in my limited 12-year experience here so far. I know, for example, in the United States, Thanksgiving is a really big, big day.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
And here, Canadian Thanksgiving is less celebrated by the Jewish community, but I don't think that's because of a patriotic issue. I think, for example, in my case, because many American Jewish families don't see each other that often, Thanksgiving becomes an opportunity to get together. And for many Toronto-based Jewish families, they get together every Shabbat, so they don't necessarily need an annual occasion to celebrate family togetherness.
I see. Okay. I want to get back to this whole idea of the Canadian versus the American and how that sort of works its way through the Jewish communities. Because I have some thoughts on that. Before we go to the break, one idea that I had is that indeed, because you're American, you are more central to the world. I mean, whichever way you cut it, right? United States is still the leader of the free world. That leadership is being eroded, no question about it. But we as Canadians have always felt as though we are the small, not geographical, but we are the small neighbor to the north. Our influence on the world is not near as great as the American influence. And that works its way through the average citizen and the average Jewish community leader. So when we come back, I want you to touch on that and tell me if you see a distinction, again, between the American character and the Jewish character, the Jewish character in the States and in Canada. You're listening, you're watching Via Hafta Television. I should say sometimes, by the way, I should add that we also do Via Hafta Radio. And if you would like to hear our radio shows, you should go to our website at viahafta.org. That is why sometimes I say you're listening to Via Hafta TV. But indeed, you're watching it, and stay with us. We are taking you into the world of empathy with Rabbi Howard Morrison, and we will be back in a moment. Welcome back to Via Hafta Television. My name is Avrum Rosenzweig. Via Hafta Television is sponsored by Via Hafta, the Canadian Jewish Humanitarian and Relief Committee. You know us well, Rabbi, because we've done a lot of work with you in your shul.
Absolutely.
Now, we have been around for about 15 years now, and if you'd like to learn more about us, we're Canada's only Jewish humanitarian organization. Please go to our website at viahafta.org, and that's VEAHAVTA, or you're welcome to give us a call at 416-964-7698. We do some pretty funky stuff We work here locally with the homeless. We have a van that goes out 5 nights a week, taking volunteers under the bridges of Toronto, giving out hot drinks in the winter and cold drinks in the summertime. And we're very Jewish about our work with the homeless. The idea being that we, the people of the book, we actually give out books off our homeless van and eyeglasses so that people living on the street have an opportunity to read, of which they do a lot, by the way, Rabbi. I don't know if you know this or not. Yeah. Have you gone out in our van?
Personally, not yet. I never say no. I say not yet, which is based on a famous Jewish story about a philosopher named Franz Rosenzweig who almost left the Jewish heritage, then came back to it, then started observing traditional Jewish practices one step at a time, and was confronted by someone who asked, Franz, are you observing the Sabbath? He said, yes. Are you keeping kosher? He said, yes. Are you putting tefillin on every morning? And he wasn't. He didn't say no. He said not yet because he was striving to get to that place. So I have not yet been on the van. But I would add, at my synagogue, and I thank you, and via Hafta, we've had a number of our bar bat mitzvah children when they come up for their ceremonies and becoming teenagers, celebrating their rite of passage. I think some of them have been on the bus or the van. Our kids have prepared sandwiches that have been distributed through the van to the homeless downtown. And it's been a pleasure having you speak in our congregation.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
I look forward to that again.
Yeah, I'd like to do it again. Franz Rosenzweig, a cousin of mine, by the way.
So I'm glad I quoted it.
Not really, I made that up. But
I'm so glad I quoted it.
You were telling me you're related to Boober. I didn't agree. I didn't believe you. But just kidding, Rabbi.
I'm not related to Van Morrison either.
You're not.
No.
Great music. We were talking about the distinction between American Jews and Canadian Jews. I know that when I go into Niagara Falls, United States, there is a different feeling there. There just is. The moment you step over the border, I have an American, there's this energy that changes. I can't tell you exactly what it's predicated on. I know there's far more advertising. You Americans, you advertise everywhere, everywhere. It's unbelievable, the sides of buses, curbsides. I mean, I remember watching, hockey games years ago. All of a sudden, all the boards were plastered with advertisements. We do that here now, too. But there's this great sense of commercialism in the States that you don't have as much of here.
It's funny, living in Toronto, I become personified as Rabbi America.
Rabbi America.
So
you should be wearing a cape.
Yeah. A number of years ago when there was a delicate decision in who won the American election, between George Bush and Al Gore, and it was very close, and there was a little bit of a controversy. Every Canadian that I met, and I was fairly new to Toronto at that time, is, you Americans, you don't know how to count election ballots.
That's right, you Americans.
And I became the personification of all of that.
Yeah.
I know when I came here in 2000, and this was not my perception, but it was presented to me, the perception that Canada was like a younger sibling or a cousin, to the United States. The only way that I can reflect on that is I know that as a child growing up, I learned almost nothing about Canada in my American education. But I know children who go to school in Canada, including my own 2 boys, they learn a lot about U.S. history. So there is certainly a dichotomy that Canadians know a lot more about America and Americans know very little about Canada. And maybe that is reflective of the distinction in other areas.
Listen, there's a bigness about you guys. There really is. I mean, I've been on dozens of phone calls with American organizations having to do with the humanitarian work. And the Americans control the calls. The Americans on a regular basis forget to mention that there are Canadians on the line. And when I share this with my colleagues working for other NGOs, they'll say, of course, that happens all the time. There is this real sense of big brother, and it translates into many different ways.
When I was moving here before 2000, and I was moving from Long Island, New York, oh, Rabbi, you're moving to Toronto, Canada. They didn't know the word Ontario.
Yeah, right.
No one said, they say Toronto, Canada.
Yeah.
And I said,
so we're one big province.
That's like saying Boston, U.S., not Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And then, oh, you're moving to Toronto, Canada. I have a friend in Vancouver, another friend in Vancouver, and Winnipeg, and Ottawa.
Do you know them? Yeah.
Can you say hello to them like we all live on one street in Canada?
Yeah.
So I think there is a lack of appreciation and education about Canada in American culture.
But you've heard of Margaret Trudeau.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah. We're going to a break. Before we do, I want to ask you a quick question. A community member invites you to a hockey game between the Leafs and Boston. okay? And you're sitting in these fabulous chairs, and he's inordinately important in your shul. And Boston scores on the Leafs. Do you cheer?
Absolutely.
You do you, Rabbi?
do.
Well,
And it was made
so-
clear before I accepted the invitation that I would be doing such a thing.
I thought you were going to say before you signed your contract with the shul.
Almost.
We're talking to Rabbi Howard Morrison, a rabbi here in Toronto at Beth Emma Synagogue. We're going to a break, but when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. We're going to wrap things up in our final segment, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the principles that you live by having to do with tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. Stay with us. We're taking you into the world of empathy on V'Ahavta Television. You know, we at V'Ahavta have done many things over the last 15 years in terms of our humanitarian responses. As I said before, we're Canada's only Jewish humanitarian organization, and our organization is predicated on sort of the hierarchy of needs. So we do a lot of work in Toronto. We actually started up a school last year called the V'Ahavta Street Academy, and essentially we have about 10 students during a semester. We teach them life skills. We have academic studies. If you watch Hockey Night in Canada, Ron McLean, who does a little gig with Don Cherry, is one of the co-chairs of the V'Ahavta Street Academy. But it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it's very Jewish, Rabbi, in terms of educating people, starting where they're at, giving them the opportunity to develop their mind, their intellect, their soul. And this is all toward getting them off the street. I think it's safe to say that in Judaism, the development of the self is a very big piece. I often say, I often speak about Abraham leaving Ur of Chaldees as a way of sort of finding his existential self. And we sort of superimpose that over our humanitarian work so that we have the V'Ahavta Street Academy. We have a creative writing contest for the homeless. Every year we ask people to write prose or poetry about their lives or about anything they want. Again, the idea being that when you see yourself writing, and I'm sure you've had this yourself, and you read your piece at the end, you think to yourself, my God, that was me who wrote that. Mm-hmm. That extends from my heart, my soul, my mind. Maybe I can write more. Maybe I can be a writer. Maybe I can be an editor. Maybe I can get off the street. So those are the principles that we live by. The principles of tikkun olam, I assume, are very similar in a shul environment. Maybe they vary a tad. What are sort of the 3 or 4 things that you subscribe to when you take into your days with you having to do with tikkun olam?
So ideas that come to mind, learning must lead to action.
Yeah.
And that's a basic axiom in Jewish thought. Learning must lead to action. Mm-hmm. In Judaism, there's a place for individual, a place for a local community, and then a place for the universal. Sometimes they're distinct, but oftentimes they are interrelated. Mm-hmm. So the individual has to be part of something larger than him or herself. This is the notion that when you give, you receive at the same time. Giving is receiving. When you visit the sick, the one who visits gets just as much out of the visit as the one being visited. So a lot of relationship, a lot of interrelationship with one and the other, and obviously trying to see the other with a face, with humanity, that whoever we're interacting with, has the spark of God, within. I'm a big believer that nobody has the whole truth. We all have approximations of the truth. So I always try to associate myself with people who actually think a little differently than me.
Yes.
So that I can try to expand my horizon of truth and then be more productive. Modesty, humility are axiomatic to tikkun olam. Arrogance and self-righteousness, there's no place for that in tikkun olam. In my synagogue, since I've been there, we now participate in an interfaith effort called the Out of the Cold program. Mm-hmm. In fact, we are asked for 8 Monday nights in the winter months, and last night was our 8th Monday night doing it.
Good for you.
We feed up to 100 people.
We should say Out of the Cold is a program done through the synagogues and churches, which allows, and perhaps mosques as well, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe all,
and which allows homeless people to come in out of the cold.
Literally, off the street, as we're talking about. And I just want to tell you, it's an amazing situation, at least the one that I see at my own synagogue at Beth Emeth.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of volunteers from my synagogue. And I can't tell you they come to synagogue every week or every month for ritualistic purposes, but they find their place in Jewish life through this act of chesed, of kindness, of tikkun olam. They repair the world, where they interact with the homeless and the hungry of our community. It's sad that we have anybody homeless or hungry, but the fact is we don't deny it. And our Synagogues Out of the Cold program is probably a microcosm of what V'ahavta does on a day-in, day-out basis throughout the entire year. I have teenagers up to people in their 80s. Some people work early evenings. Some people are there at 5 in the morning. And we treat those who come to us as our guests. And they are given absolute respect. There's no sense that I'm up here and they're down somewhere else. We're all horizontal. We're all equal in the way we look at each other, because ultimately we're all equal and the same in our presence before God. And often I or one of my clergy colleagues in the synagogue will come in at dinner time and we'll share a word of inspiration, a word of value, always couched in language that is in harmony with Judaism, but a language in Judaism that also speaks to everybody in the world.
Yes.
So for a Jew to do tikkun olam, we have to be true to our convictions, but our convictions always have a universal application.
Very good. Rabbi, before we wrap up, we'd like to ask our guests a couple of very, very personal and intimate questions. Don't get nervous. What book are you reading right now?
I am actually reading a number of books. I go through my books very, very slowly. Other than reading the book about the Boston Bruins being Stanley Cup champions over the past year, and of course reading the weekly Torah portion a number of times for my own spiritual preparation, as well as my own professional preparation for teaching my congregation, I enjoy reading, in terms of Jewish literature, Jewish legal interpretations. So I read the newest materials that are coming out in terms of responsa and commentaries on sacred Jewish texts, or how to apply the concepts of sacred Jewish texts to current modern-day living situations.
Who was the greatest hockey player that ever lived?
Bobby Orr.
Bobby Orr?
Of course.
No question in your mind?
In my mind, but someone else might think differently.
Greatest goalie?
The greatest goalie? I didn't get a chance to watch him except for once or twice at the end of his career, but I think Jacques Plante.
Who's the greatest baseball player that ever lived?
I would say Ted Williams, but I'm not totally objective. He was a Red Sox player.
He was a Red Sox player. That's right. That's right.
Last player to bat over 400.
Yeah, which is unbelievable, isn't it?
406.
Yes, unbelievable.
There's a seating area at Fenway Park called the 406 Club.
I know, I've seen it.
406 seats
right.
in honor of that batting average.
Rabbi Howard Morrison, it's been a pleasure to interview you and talk with you.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
I have enjoyed it very much.
An absolute privilege.
Thank you for joining our country.
Thank you for allowing me in.
There's a big Americanization of shuls and rabbis here in Toronto, and I actually think it's a very positive thing. And I think this interview confirms that.
I can share one thought. When I first came to Canada in 2000, everyone said to me, "Do you have your sin?" I said, "Excuse me?
Yeah, lots of
I'm coming here to be a rabbi of a spiritual community, and you want me to come in right away with sin? What is this?" "No, Rabbi, sin, S-I-N, you need a social insurance
number.
Oh, in the States that's called SSN, Social Security number.
I got my card when I was 5 years old. I still have it.
So, yes, I have my sin.
Rabbi,
my sin number.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to doing it again. And thank you for watching the show. Once again, it's called V'ahavta Television. And we were taking you into a world of empathy. We would like you to learn more about V'ahavta, and you can do so at v'ahavta.org. That's V-E-A-H-A-V-T-A. Please feel free to give us a call at 416-964-7698. Once again, thank you for watching. Have a beautiful week, and we'll see you again.